Welcome back to Tambellini's Top of Mind podcast. I'm your host, Katelyn Ilkani, and today we're talking with Augie Freda, the campus data steward at the University of Notre Dame. We're going to be discussing data governance in higher education with Augie today, and we're going to hear from him about his lessons learned and especially how the pandemic has changed data governance in higher education and what we're looking to in the future. Welcome to the show, Augie.
Thanks, Katelyn, and welcome everyone. I'm really happy to be here. It's an honor to be part of the podcast, and I look forward to how we meander through the conversation today.
Me too, Augie. I'm really looking forward to hearing about how the emphasis on data governance at Notre Dame has really helped the university through all of the transitions that have happened during the pandemic. And let's kind of start there. So as we look back over now more than a year of being in this new normal, how do you feel like approaches or urgency around data governance has changed?
Sure. Well, I've been in this role for 5 years. I'm the first person to hold this role at Notre Dame, and it was really all to get us moving on the data governance environment and setting up our business intelligence data informed decision making. And in the years leading up to the pandemic, the question we most often got was, well, what problem are we trying to solve by doing this, by defining that, by all of those kinds of things. And then the pandemic hit. And all of a sudden, it was really obvious to all of us what the problem was we were trying to solve. Access to meaningful, reliable, usable data became absolutely critical to our ability to manage and keep the university open through this pandemic. And I couldn't imagine how we could have responded and functioned without. Everything from who is it that's supposed to be on campus? So how do we know for whom to hold the daily health check requirements? How do we manage isolation and quarantine? All of those kinds of things. Who are the people that we need to worry about for that? And then when we do get cases, how do we contact trace, and who are the people that they were, the folks who are testing positive are in close contact with, because they're not going to remember everybody. So how do we look at those sorts of things? So on the plus side, we had a lot of the data structure and governance had already taken place. We had a solid foundation for access and privacy. And we had all of the data moved from that we needed, most of it at least, from our transactional systems into our data warehouse, where we could marry it all together and start cross-referencing things and doing some pretty deep dive analysis to figure out what were we really experiencing as we had outbreaks or whatever around campus. And so that was really kind of the setup. On the other hand, we have found a lot of holes and a lot of cases. Again, back to those things where we're saying, well, what problem are we really trying to solve? Because we can get by with what we have. Yeah, it takes a little bit longer and we got to spend more time cleaning up data and all of that before we use it. But before having a real impending deadline and crisis, not one that was arbitrary and self-manufactured on our part. Okay, we have this deadline, we want to get this done by this date, but if we miss this date, okay, so we missed the date, right? If we miss this date, we're not opening this fall, this past fall. So these were real deadlines, and they were being influenced by things and conditions that were completely outside of our control. And on top of that, the questions that kept coming in were questions that 3 hours earlier we didn't even know to ask. And now we're asking this question. And lo and behold, we have the data in a usable form in order to make those decisions. So a great example, we open campus. A week in, we have an incredible spike in cases on campus. No idea why, but we went out of control. We had to quadruple the amount of quarantine and isolation space. We didn't have enough people in order to reach out to the kids. Folks weren't getting called back. We were in the news because we had students in quarantine and isolation that went a day and a half without getting food, and things like that. So what's causing this? And we put a pause on in-person classes, and we were absolutely ready to shut down and send everyone home. But because we were able to know what students were in what course sections, when and where, and because we know both on campus and off campus where students are living, we were able, with our county health officials, to quickly identify the fact that we did not have community spread. We had event spread. And we were able to trace most of the big peak and the big surge back to 3 off-campus parties.
Wow.
But we were able to identify absolutely without any question that this was not spreading in the classroom. And that allowed us to pause the classes, get all the kids back under control, because kids are going to be kids, and kind of ratchet things down. And 2 weeks later, we were back in business again. In-person classes, we created the opportunity for folks to be able to connect in if they were in quarantine or isolation. And we created a data feed for the faculty so that they knew who to expect to be online versus in person. And we were able to open back up again and resume kind of normal operations. We had a football season this year. Granted, it was only faculty, staff, and students in the stadium, but we literally were able to see hot spots by stadium section because we know where everybody's ticket was. So we had a heat map of the stadium. We could see, okay, was there a breakout that resulted of this? And rather infamously, we had played Clemson during the season. We won, and the kids stormed the field after the game. And it was in all the news, and there's all these kids out on the field. The good news is, A, they were masked. But secondly, we were able to show that by section, there really wasn't an outbreak that resulted because of that. So it was just fascinating to be able to look at the data in that way, and be able to make those kinds of decisions and feel comfortable about having home football games.
So Augie, I'm sure when you were building your data governance framework, you didn't envision all these use cases. What did it take to be able to do that example that you just gave us, where you're able to see where everyone is in the stadium, you're able to look at this heat map?
Sure. Early on, at some point during, maybe year 2 or 3 of all of this, we were moving data into the warehouse. We had governed most of our faculty staff data and such, and facilities data. We were starting to work on student data, and we had a steering committee meeting, and we kept asking our senior leadership, okay, so give us some use cases. What questions are we trying to answer with this data as we implement different phases and components of all of this? And I remember our executive vice president having a very frustrated reaction to that when he said, "Would you please stop asking me what questions we need to answer? I don't know." And that caused us to kind of adopt the philosophy or the elevator speech value proposition that said we wanted to create the infrastructure that let us answer the questions that we don't yet know to ask. Because our model before that was, in essence, every question becomes a project/report. And we realized at that point that what we were building and the whole data governance structure, as well as the business intelligence data warehouse technology backbone to this, had to be able to allow for the anticipation and to put things together that nobody thought to put together before, and do it quickly and without really having to worry about institutionalizing that question. So we went from kind of a focus on let's build dashboards to let's create an environment that at a moment's notice, given whatever situation it was, people could pose questions of the data. And if they had the right expertise, which is a whole nother story, right? That they could look at data and answer very specific questions that were almost always one-offs. And that's where we landed here. The number of times the questions changed for us over the year, and particularly in the first 6 months of the pandemic, we would have never been able to survive it. I liken it to, we're providing as data, think of it as electricity. We're the power company. The data governance program and the business intelligence environment is the power company. The power company doesn't tell you where to put the lights in your house. They don't tell you how many lights you can put in your house. They don't tell you when to turn them on and when to turn them off. But when you plug your lamp into a wall and you turn it on, the light comes on, and you don't have to wait. Nobody has to come out and run new lines and do all of those things. And at the same time, there's fail safes in place, right? To say that if you do something you shouldn't do with a power appliance or whatever, then we have fail safes that will shut that down and protect you and the institution from those kinds of mistakes. So that was really when the light bulb came on for us. And we went forward with this idea of let's look at how all of the data interact and make sure that we have all of the channels built so that we can take course registration data and marry it with an external health tracking or contact tracing application and be able to map all of that together. We can take ticket information and map it against seating charts at the for facilities to know where this is happening.
Augie, it sounds like
but
you had a philosophical change, years before even the pandemic started, about how you were going to handle how data flows and is used at the institution.
Yeah.
And as you were making those decisions, what were some of the best practices that you had to put in place to be able to use data like this? What were some of the actions you had to take?
There were probably, I would cite 3 things that we did that were like big aha, hooray, we did this. And they were all dumb luck. I mean, yeah, we planned to do them, but we planned to do them because we thought they were the right thing to do. We didn't realize the impact that it would have and the long-term impact. The first thing we did is, when we do our governance work, we create a completely transparent, self-selecting opt-in process. So we've got 40 or so different offices or units on campus. And when we're going to talk about a piece of data and build all of the metadata around that piece of data and determine what kind of access controls and what's the definition and how can it be used and where does it come from and all of those sorts of things. We poll, in essence, the entire university is pretty much represented by unit. We poll all the units and we say, here's what we're going to talk about today. Do you feel like you're responsible for this data? And there's where we uncover silos and cases where we got, possession is 9/10 of the law. I have it, therefore it's my data. And that's where we uncover that. And we can say, no, you're really not the data steward for that. This is the data steward. And we plot it out on a RACI matrix, responsible, accountable, consult, inform. And we also add a 5th, no role or no stake. And then, so people can say, yeah, I think I'm responsible. I think I'm accountable for the data that's there. Hey, I use this. This is important enough to my role and my function that I need to participate in this. Mm-hmm. Or just tell me tell me what you guys decide, because I'm more of a casual user of it, or I really don't have a role. And not only do we do that as an invitation, but we capture that as part of the metadata. So we know if we find an issue with, okay, this definition no longer fits this term or something changing in the metadata, we know who to invite back and who to run that by, because we capture all that as part of the metadata. So that was step 1. And one last thing on that is, the beauty of doing the self opt-in is that participation and engagement has been incredibly high, because we're not forcing somebody to come sit through, an hour workshop session to define 8 terms that they have no interest in. So we don't just invite all 40 people. We're going to do this, come. We tell them what we're going to talk about in advance. We give them draft metadata and we say, hey, if this is valuable to you, come. And early on, a lot of people were coming out, but as we move forward, now typically we'll have 4 or 5 units will be represented, and the most now are comfortable with, look, I really don't have a role, or just let me know. So that was one. The second one was, we early on started using this a tool that we called guiding principles. And what happened in that case was, typically the data stewards are going to err on the side of being 100% risk averse. We don't want any risk. So we're going to classify all the data as sensitive or restricted. And at our first iteration of the warehouse, in our first, it was probably 400 terms that we had ready to go, 80% of them were designated by the stewards as restricted access. Uh, and so we went back to the steering committee. It was our executive vice president and our senior associate provost. And we said, the EVP runs the operational side of the university, and obviously the provost is the academic side. And we went back to them and said, okay, we're going to turn this on, but it's not going to be very interesting because everything's restricted. Well, like what's restricted? Well, like the course catalog. Why is the course catalog restricted? We publish that. Well, the data steward is the registrar in this case, is restricting it because it changes right up until the last minute. And they don't want people making decisions until it's, and then not knowing that it changed further down the road. Well, data changes all the time. That's ridiculous. That should not be restricted, right? Mm-hmm. We said, but nobody's ever told the data stewards how to make that decision. Mm-hmm. So we put together a set of guiding principles where we had our general counsel, senior associate provost, executive vice president, strategic planning and institutional research in a room. And we said, what are the guiding principles? How do we tell the folks to make this decision? And they came up, I think there are 11 of them. The first one, presume trust. Mm. You don't have the right as a data steward to say that person doesn't get it because I don't trust them. We hire everybody with high standards. We expect people to have integrity. We need to say we trust them. Second guiding principle, we don't restrict access out of fear of misinterpretation, fear that the data is going to change, or fear that we're discovering bad or missing data. In fact, we want that to happen. So, and there were several others. And then the biggest change in it, I think, really as part of those guiding principles was I went back to the leadership team and I said, okay, so what are you going to do? And I told them, and they agreed completely, that we expected them to be the arbitrators. So if we got to a point where somebody requesting access and the data steward couldn't agree, then we were going to come to them and they would make the call. But at the same time, we want you to reaffirm the role of the data stewards, because you're not taking the ball out of their hands. You're just giving them guidance, right? And they did that. But the biggest change was we put the burden of justification on the person wishing to restrict the access, as opposed to the person wanting to gain the access. Prior, it was the other way around. Well, what's your business case? Why do you need this data? That's no longer the question. The question now is, why do you feel like this needs to be restricted? Because the default answer for access should be yes, unless there's a reason for it to be no. And that drama doesn't equal damage. And we need to make sure that we have clear and present likelihood of damage to the university if you're going to restrict this. We went from 80% of the data being restricted to roughly 20% or less overnight, just by implementing the guiding principles.
Wow.
And then we've taken that a step further and we've applied guiding principles to domains of data. Mm-hmm. So we now have a set of guiding principles for who has access, who has legitimate educational need, and who is a school official for data that's protected by FERPA. We have guiding principles for all of our COVID data. We have guiding principles for our EEO and demographic. So we know at the outset, we have something on which to base those decisions. So that was really, I think, the second item. And the third was, and I have to give our CIO at the time credit for this. From his background, he said, well, you guys should just build conceptual data models. So we did. And we've built one so far, actually, and it's focused on student. And so we now have, kind of a network map that shows every node is a repository of data. So a student is a node, a course is a node. And we have a network map now that shows how does this bucket of data called a student interact with this bucket of data called a course or a course section. So now we can answer the question, how does a faculty member see a student? Well, a faculty member can see a student because the student is in a class they're teaching. They can see the student because they're advising the student. They can see the student because they're a department chair and the student is majoring or minoring in their department. And so we can see all of those connections. And now that helps us to define what programs, if you will, we call it our TV network, right? What programs, each one of those is a channel, and which programs play on that channel. So if I'm a faculty member and I'm looking at you as a student from a course perspective, I get to see everything about you, but only as it pertains to the course. So I see all of your contact information. I see the grades and assignments and everything for that course, but I don't see any of your other grades. If I'm a department chair and you're majoring in my department, I see all of the grades you're getting for other courses and all of those kinds of things. So it expands out or contracts, and we now have maps that will tell us, okay, how does this work? And we did this by crowdsourcing. We had 65 people from across campus, including a group of 8 students that we pulled together in the workshops and started with a blank sheet of paper by topic area and said, okay, here's a node student in the middle. Your table works on athletics. How does a student interact with athletics? And they drew the map, and we ran workshop after workshop after workshop of those. I can't tell you, workshops typically had 10 or 11 people in it. So we had, 8 workshops or something like that. And we compiled all of this data, and there was a ton of overlap, but every single one of those sessions gave us a new channel to think about that we hadn't thought of before. And so those 3 things, I think, really help us put in place this idea that we just need to build the channels and secure them appropriately. And then we'll let you decide what show you want to watch and what channel you want to turn on and when. And so those really were the 3 biggest things, I think, that
we've been talking about a RACI chart here, and I'm thinking about, as you're talking about all the people on campus who've been involved in this effort. So who ultimately owns the data governance strategy and the policy? Is it all collaborative? Does it go back to the executive steering committee?
It does go back to, there was an executive steering committee for the business intelligence project and program, but since we've now blessed that as operational, that doesn't exist. We have a standing university committee called the Information Governance Committee, which is made up primarily of data stewards and a couple of executive offices, provost's office, president's office, and EVP's office. And that group, that's the group that has to accept and recommend, actually bless policy before it goes to the university's policy committee. And they think of things from a strategic perspective. So whatever we're doing, when we had the guiding principles, even though it was the senior executives that built them, we took them to the Information Governance Committee and said, okay, here's the guiding principles. Here's how we want to roll them out. Do you concur? Is there something that you're having trouble with or whatever? So they kind of oversee it.
Mm-hmm.
But I will tell you this, that it is, I use the expression all the time, it's top-down driven, but bottom-up executed. And we have a senior associate provost and now a provost, because we've just changed that role. The provost is a data scientist, and the senior associate provost is a self-proclaimed data geek. And our executive vice president at the time was a data geek. And our now new EVP is also a data geek, if you will. They love data, they like to play with it, dig into it. They don't have the time, but they get the value of it, right? And so without them driving this,
Mm-hmm.
it makes it very difficult to get the grassroots execution. Because if you don't get all the people in the room, then it's going to be real easy for somebody to say, well, that's their data and their application. And we've had some absolutely fantastic discussions and empathy built when we do these sessions with the folks who self-identified through the RACI process, because people had no idea that this office needs this data. They had no idea. And how, if we define it and use it this way, it's not going to meet their needs. So that but they also know that when push comes to shove, the first question coming out of our senior leadership is going to be, where did this data come from? And if it didn't come from the business intelligence environment, they're going to be immediately suspect of the data.
Augie, what kind of technology and tools have you had to implement to make all of this happen?
From a data governance standpoint, this question, and I should say upfront for full disclosure that I work out of the office of the CIO. Our CIO oversees the office of the CIO and our Office of Information Technology. They're the folks who do the implementation, manage the applications, and build the infrastructure and all of that. The office of the CIO is kind of the data conscience of the university. Project management is in there. Messaging and communication is in there. I'm in there. InfoSec is in there. So we're kind of separate from that. So maybe this will help with what I'm about to say. This is not a technology problem. This is a culture and change problem. And this is a culture and change challenge. You can have the most wonderful technology solution in the world, but if you can't get past the fact that it's actually institutional data and it's an institutional asset, then none of those applications and such are going to matter. How do we get from it's okay for people to see data? How do we get from it's okay for people to ask questions because of the data? And that just because the data appears to be indicating something wrong, let's presume trust and not immediately say that there's a problem here. Great example, looking at turnover rate, right? Well, this office has a 40% turnover rate, and this office has a 5% turnover rate. The office that has the 40% turnover rate had 10 people in it, and 4 of them took an early retirement package. The folks who had the 5% was a 400 person unit, and the impact of that was probably more significant than this, because we could manage this one. we could manage the 40% one because we knew it was coming. We offered an early retirement package. The other one, you never know when they're going to walk away. And so, but it's okay to ask, well, why does that unit have a 40% turnover rate? Or why is that unit's staff growth so high? Well, it's because we moved a subunit from this organization to their organization. They didn't hire 20 more people. They just acquired 20 more people and somebody else lost them. So the net change, there wasn't one. It's okay to ask those questions, and it's okay to see those things and say, well, why did that happen? Oh, okay, that's why that happened. That's okay. Or why did that happen? Oh, that's not okay. And we need to fix that. So
Augie, as we wrap up our conversation today, do you have any lasting thoughts or advice for institutions that are just starting this journey and maybe not sure where to start or how to get that culture change really moving?
Two things. One is be impatiently patient. Know when to jump up and down and scream and shout and not to. Culture change takes time. Change management takes time, and don't shy away from that. Don't try to boil the ocean either. Take it in small little steps. Look for small victories and such. But the other biggest thing I think that helped us a lot was we didn't shy away from making senior leadership uncomfortable.
Mm.
How often do we hear that don't bring your boss a problem, bring your boss a solution? Well, the truth is sometimes the boss is the only one that can solve the problem. And what we found was, quite candidly, the bosses wanted to solve the problems, but nobody ever showed them what the real problem was. So people down below who weren't trying to bring problems to their boss were doing extraordinary work and incredible heavy lifting to get answers, because there were all of these problems that data governance and such could solve, but because it was such institution-wide or so broad of an impact, they themselves couldn't solve it. But when we put the senior leadership on the spot and said, here's what the issue is, make them feel uncomfortable. Get them the incentive, because nobody's going to change until the hurt and pain of changing becomes less than the hurt and pain of whatever the condition is, right? So you got to make sure they understand where the pain's coming from. And sometimes it means asking pretty bold questions like, I don't want my analyst, this came from a senior leader, I don't want my analyst to have access to performance review and salary data. Why not? Well, because that person may not be mature enough in their career to handle that. I immediately asked the question, then why did you put them in that position?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't ask that question and you just step back and you say, okay, well, because in reality, that person is the senior leader to everybody else at the university. If they go and ask the HR VP, give me a spreadsheet that has all the salaries and performance ratings in it, HR is going to give it to them. And now it's going to be on a spreadsheet in a thumb drive or whatever, attached to an email, which we all know is so much more secure than firewalls and such. So be bold, but be patient, and understand that people have, it has to be their idea. You just have to fool them into thinking that it is.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Augie, and sharing all of this wisdom that you've learned through this process.
lots of arrows in the back, I think. But that's a good thing, right? I put myself in that same bucket. It's okay to be uncomfortable and feel pain. It's okay to say, I don't know what to do next.
That wraps up our conversation today with the Top of Mind podcast. Thank you for joining us. You've been hearing from Augie Freda, Campus Data Steward at the University of Notre Dame. We'll be back next month with another topic, and you can always check out our free resources at thetambellinigroup.com, as well as our member-only resources. Talk to you next month.